There are terms around disability and being disabled from insider and outsider perspectives. So among ourselves, we call each other maybe crip. My favourite one is freak. I'm a freak. I'm totally a self-professed freak. However, if somebody else calls me freak who's not part of the experience, then it arouses a completely different sort of feeling.
Because it's really easy for people to suddenly become homeless or jobless. It can happen to anyone. It can be a brain injury. You can have a car accident and get a brain injury and suddenly lose your job, be unable to pay the rent, get evicted from your house, and end up couch surfing and with no job. And it can spiral really, really, really quickly. And your relationships with your family might break down because you haven't got the emotional capacity to manage those relationships, and you end up really alone. And somehow it's your fault. That's what the system sort of seems to tell you, and you feel shame. We live in a society that is very able-bodied, and that means that people who are disabled are seen as, or on the outer, are seen as the other and are seen as a problem, and often because we're not trying hard enough.
For me, I receive the disability support pension, so it becomes apparent immediately when people are actually looking at my application. And for me, I feel like I need to explain, all right, what does this mean in terms of, can I look after the house? Do I have help from the council to look after the house? I feel like it actually places me in a position where people can discriminate and think, oh, she has an immune condition, she might not have much energy, she might not keep the place clean.
If you're disabled, it's really hard to, say, get access to jobs or get access to education. And yet society sees that you're not trying hard enough because you haven't got a job. You know, you're poor because you haven't got a job and you're not working hard enough, or you're not able to get a job. But actually it's because you haven't been given access to the education or access to the jobs. You and I know that people with disabilities can do lots of things, but generally speaking, we're not given the opportunity, or there's very low expectations of us. And that in itself is discriminatory.
The expectations that we have for the ambitions and the dreams of disabled people are much, much lower as a society. Like we just don't expect them to have those dreams. We don't have those dreams for them. And for someone who's able-bodied, it's just an expectation.
The handicapped child is not a whole person. They are damaged. And so these words that come up against us have real roots in history. And I don't like feeding people's ability to keep using these stupid words, but you can really see where they've come from. And in a way, this sort of battle we have to fight to change this notion that disability is forever aberrant, abhorrent, unnatural, disgusting, too different, too hard. And it's quite a battle. Every day. Now, it's like racism, actually. I say to people, people say, oh, I'm not a racist. Nonsense. Racism and ableism are all around us all the time and affect everyone. The best thing you can do is to fight it every single day. And even in myself with ableism, I feel that sometimes about other disabled people. Oh, the bloody, whatever. And I'm thinking that, and I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, even I do it. So every day I'm also fighting my own ableism.
I always try to stand up for people with a disability. Being a self-advocate, learn to tell people how you feel and that isn't right with the way you're speaking to us. So if I see someone with a disability getting picked on, I always try to step in and say, well, no, you're not. That is not the right thing you're doing to that person. You need to ask us in a different way. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to get belted, but I'm only standing up for our rights as well as the person that they're picking on. So,
well, I think they should get their attitude changed. I mean, how would they like it if we blame them because they have a good job and have a perfect life? They wouldn't like it. So You know, it's a bit like blaming us because we have a disability.
I think it's very embarrassing that we call ourselves human beings, but so like deliberately go around ignoring half of humanity, more than half. Not only ignoring, absolutely abusing. And I'm embarrassed.
They're inconsiderate. I was one of them people too. You know, I was like that too. You know, when I was a lot younger and I was judgmental. You know, but I found for myself, you know, that like to change that being inconsiderate to being considerate. You know, yeah, and I had to stop being selfish and be selfless. How can I help someone today, but without expecting anything in return? You know, but I had to do a lot of work on that within myself. You know, but there's a lot of judgmental people here.
My latest experience with property managers has not been fantastic. They knew I had a brain injury. However, that did not stop them from asking me to vacate the property when I had called them up in a state of panic because I had locked myself out of the house.
People have preconceptions of particular races, which is terrible, and particular disabilities. So imagine if you had both on top of it. But because of my disability, I couldn't go to private rental because no private rental place is gonna let me change the bathrooms or toilets. So I had to go through the public system, and to get to the public system, I had to go to a refuge.
I still find it remarkable that there are people who are so judgmental of people who are disabled, even though it is everywhere and I shouldn't be surprised. But it is because disability is going to affect all of us. And whether we become disabled in our lifetime, whether we become disabled ourselves or we care for somebody who's disabled, it is going to affect us all. It's part of life. It's part of being human. And yet somehow there's all this sort of language around that, you know, that we are a problem, or somehow it's not going to happen to you. You're not going to become disabled. But it can happen to you very quickly. And unfortunately, when it does happen to you, then you understand how judgmental society is.
A disabled life is a difficult life. A disabled life is a life spent continually adjusting yourself to the demands of society around you, which is something that non-disabled people do as well. However, for a disabled person, it can be exhausting to be constantly on guard, to be constantly looking about oneself, to be constantly gauging people's reactions, to be constantly feeling that you have to justify yourself, to be constantly searching for work, to be constantly assuring others of your value and that you are just as worthy as anybody else. Comparisons are tiring. I should know that. I've lived the last 20 years in constant comparison.
So there are some disabilities that affect everyday life, and there are some that don't affect everyday life as much. But as far as getting to where you want to be, you can't let it disrupt your life all the time, because if it does, you won't go nowhere.
because you can't really go and get those other things, like a job, until you have safe and decent housing. But there is so much shame around feeling when you find that self-position, when you find yourself needing housing and not having it, and when you don't have enough money, and if you have a disability, there's great amount of shame in those things. There shouldn't be, but there is. And a lot of that comes from the language of our society that sees people with disabilities as somehow a problem and that we're wrong. Our bodies are wrong and they need to be fixed. You get a fair go if you give a fair go. Is that it? And that totally doesn't recognise that not everybody is getting a fair go in the first place.
I did have a lady at a place a couple of years ago. She lived across the back fence. It was like I had to be super, super quiet when I was out in my backyard, or else she'd want to have a half-hour chat across the fence. But yeah, I like knowing that neighbours are around, and I haven't often had trouble with neighbours. I have had one horrible situation where all of a sudden this neighbour decided that she didn't like us and was actually quite discriminatory and started singing hi-ho, hi-ho dwarf songs to us, which was not very nice, and yell things at the house. But I understand that she had her own issues. But I think every other place that we've been to, that I've been to, neighbours have been really lovely and friendly and open and kind. That's my situation. There have been sometimes neighbourhood issues, whereas when I was living with my kids and my ex-partner, we were a family of all short-statured people, and the town knew where we lived. So sometimes there would be things thrown at the house, things called out from cars passing by. That was difficult. That was really difficult. That is not a very nice situation. But actual neighbours around us were usually very lovely, and we could have neighbours that we could say to them, look, we're having some issues with the neighbourhood kids. Can you keep a watch on the house for us? And they'd be more than happy to do that. They would confront people if they were being not very nice. So, yeah.
What I would like people who are non-disabled to try and understand is that one day you may be walking the street. One day you may go across the road. One day that car may hit you. One day you may have a disability the same as what I've got. Maybe then and only then will you know what it's like to be in the shoes of a person with a disability. For God's sake, stop segregating people with a disability. Stop seeing us as subnormal. Stop seeing us not being normal. Start seeing us as a person with the same basic human rights and responsibilities that you have got.